Ladies and gentlemen, let us take a moment to acknowledge something we all silently face but rarely discuss openly: the unhappy brain. In today's world, we have more convenience, more access, and more connection than ever before, yet we are battling rising levels of stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction. The truth is, our brains are not always programmed to keep us happy. They are wired for survival, constantly scanning for danger, endlessly replaying worries, and amplifying fears. That is why, as Mo Gawdat often says, we must learn to give our brains some assistance. Happiness is not something that happens by chance, it is something we must intentionally cultivate. The unhappy brain thrives on overthinking. It replays every mistake, magnifies every flaw, and holds on to painful memories. Left unchecked, it convinces us that life is heavier than it truly is. The assistance it needs is not denial of reality, but the gentle redirection of focus. Imagine if we could teach our brains to see not just the one thing that went wrong, but the 9 things that went right. Imagine if we reminded ourselves daily that while we cannot control every event, we can always control the story we tell ourselves about it. Happiness is not the absence of problems, but the skill of handling them with perspective. When you practice gratitude, your brain begins to notice abundance instead of scarcity. When you practice kindness, your brain recognizes connection instead of isolation. When you practice acceptance, your brain learns to rest instead of constantly resisting. Each of these small choices is a form of assistance, a way of reprogramming the mind to serve your joy instead of stealing it. The unhappy brain often whispers that you are not enough, that you are behind, that others are living better lives than you. Social media, comparison, and unrealistic expectations fuel these whispers. But the truth is, happiness is not found in being more than someone else. It is found in being at peace with yourself. Mo Gawdat reminds us that happiness is a decision, a commitment to choose joy even when life throws its toughest challenges at us. It is the courage to say, I will not let my mind sabotage my peace. We need to become the caretakers of our own minds. Just as we train our bodies to become stronger, we must train our thoughts to become lighter. Meditation, journaling, reflection, and mindfulness are not luxuries. They are necessities in a world that constantly pulls us into stress. By giving our brains this support, we gradually build resilience, patience, and clarity. Life becomes less about chasing happiness and more about creating it moment by moment. So today, let this be a gentle reminder: your unhappy brain does not define you. It is simply asking for your guidance. Assist it with gratitude, nourish it with love, calm it with presence, and lead it with purpose. Happiness is not as far away as your mind sometimes tells you. It is always within reach, waiting for you to choose it. Your brain is wired for survival, not happiness, which is why it often amplifies fear, worry, and dissatisfaction. This truth is uncomfortable, but it helps explain so much of our daily struggle. For millions of years, the human brain evolved in environments filled with danger. Our ancestors lived in caves, forests, and savannas where threats were constant and survival depended on caution. The brain learned to be on high alert, to scan for problems, to notice risk before opportunities. It became a machine designed to protect us, not necessarily to keep us joyful. In modern times, however, this survival wiring often works against us. We are rarely running from predators, but the brain still reacts as if everyday inconveniences are life-threatening battles. It magnifies stress at work, fear of failure, and even small disagreements, turning them into overwhelming experiences. Think about how easily your brain clings to negativity. One hurtful comment can outweigh 10 compliments. One mistake can replay in your head for weeks, while countless successes fade quickly. This is because the brain believes negativity must be remembered. It might help you survive if something similar happens again. But survival and happiness are not the same. What kept us safe thousands of years ago can now trap us in cycles of worry and dissatisfaction. Your brain amplifies fear to protect you, but in the process, it often steals your peace. It is not malicious, it is simply doing its job, but that job needs your guidance in today's world. Imagine walking into a room filled with people. Your brain doesn't automatically notice the smiles, the welcoming faces, or the warmth of connection. Instead, it notices the one frown, the one skeptical glance, the one potential sign of rejection. That single detail dominates your experience even if everything else was positive. This is survival wiring at work. It prioritizes potential threats, even social ones, because in ancient times, rejection from a tribe could mean death. Now it simply means discomfort, but your brain hasn't fully adapted. Left untrained, it continues to amplify dissatisfaction and minimize joy. The same thing happens with future thinking. The brain constantly imagines what-if scenarios. What if I fail this project? What if I lose this relationship? What if I never achieve my goals? This constant forecasting once protected early humans by helping them prepare for danger. But in modern society, it often creates endless anxiety. Instead of living in the moment, your brain builds stories about disasters that may never happen. And when it does, your body reacts as though those disasters are real. Stress hormones rise, your heart rate increases, and you experience fear even in the absence of true danger. It is important to understand that your unhappiness is not always your fault. Your brain was never designed to prioritize happiness. It was designed to keep you alive. This shift in perspective allows you to be more compassionate with yourself. You are not weak for worrying. You are not broken for feeling dissatisfied. You are human, carrying the same ancient wiring that once kept your ancestors alive. The real challenge now is not survival, it is teaching your brain to let go of its obsession with fear and embrace the possibility of joy. The good news is that while the brain has old patterns, it is not fixed. Neuroplasticity means your thoughts and practices can reshape your mind. You can train your brain to focus on gratitude, to notice abundance, and to quiet the constant alarm bells. Every time you pause and redirect your attention to something positive, you are rewiring it, gently shifting it away from its survival mode into a state of balance. This requires patience and consistency, but it proves that happiness is not out of reach. It is a skill to be cultivated, a practice of guiding your brain instead of letting it guide you. In the end, recognizing that your brain is wired for survival, not happiness, is liberating. It explains why joy does not always come naturally, why we sometimes feel restless even when life is good, and why peace can feel fleeting. But it also reminds us that we have a choice. We can either let our brain's old patterns dominate our lives, or we can step in, assist it, and teach it new ways of seeing the world. When you do this, fear loses its grip, worry fades into perspective, and dissatisfaction transforms into gratitude. Your brain may be wired for survival, but with awareness and effort, you can guide it toward happiness. Happiness requires intentional effort. Gratitude, kindness, and acceptance can reprogram the brain toward peace. Many people believe happiness is something that happens naturally when circumstances are perfect, but life rarely offers perfection. There will always be challenges, disappointments, and uncertainties. Waiting for the external world to line up exactly as we wish is a recipe for endless frustration. Instead, happiness must be treated as a practice, something we choose and nurture daily regardless of circumstances. The brain left on autopilot tends to fall into negativity, comparison, and fear, but when we take deliberate steps to shift its focus, we begin to build new patterns that lead to inner peace. Gratitude is one of the most powerful tools in this process. The brain has a natural bias toward noticing what is missing, what went wrong, or what could go wrong. Gratitude interrupts that pattern by training us to notice abundance instead of lack. When you pause to reflect on the good things, your health, your relationships, your opportunities, even small joys like a smile from a stranger, you send a signal to your brain that life is more than just struggle. Over time, practicing gratitude rewires neural pathways, making it easier for the brain to default to optimism. It's like strengthening a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it becomes. Kindness is another intentional effort that reshapes the brain. When you perform an act of kindness, helping a colleague, offering encouragement, or simply listening with empathy, your brain releases chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine, which are linked to feelings of warmth and fulfillment. Beyond the chemical boost, kindness also shifts your attention outward. Instead of being trapped in cycles of self-doubt and worry, you connect with others, which reduces loneliness and enhances belonging. The paradox of kindness is that by lifting someone else, you lift yourself. Each small act teaches your brain that happiness is not just about personal achievement, but about meaningful connection. Acceptance plays a critical role in maintaining peace as well. Much of our suffering does not come from events themselves, but from our resistance to them. The brain often fights reality, replaying the thought, "This should not have happened," or "Things should be different." This resistance creates tension, frustration, and prolonged unhappiness. Acceptance does not mean giving up. It means acknowledging reality without letting it destroy your inner balance. When you practice acceptance, you free your brain from constant battles with the unchangeable. This allows energy to be redirected toward growth, solutions, and inner calm. When gratitude, kindness, and acceptance become habits, the brain begins to operate differently. Instead of automatically scanning for threats or clinging to negativity, it starts to recognize joy in everyday moments. Peace becomes less fragile, less dependent on perfect conditions. You discover that happiness is not an end goal to be reached someday, but a way of being you can cultivate here and now. Even in times of struggle, the intentional effort to practice these habits creates resilience. You no longer see happiness as luck. You see it as a choice you make repeatedly with every thought and every action. The process requires patience. The brain has spent years, even decades, practicing patterns of worry, comparison, or fear. It won't change overnight, but with steady effort, new pathways form, and what once felt forced begins to feel natural. Gratitude becomes instinctive, kindness becomes effortless, and acceptance becomes a way of life. This is the true power of intentional effort. It transforms not only how you feel in the moment, but also how your brain functions in the long run. Happiness becomes less of a fleeting emotion and more of a stable state of mind. In choosing to guide your brain with gratitude, kindness, and acceptance, you are not denying life's difficulties. You are choosing to rise above them, creating peace that lasts even when circumstances do not. Perspective shapes reality. Focusing on what goes right matters more than obsessing over what goes wrong. Every day we are faced with countless events, situations, and interactions. Some of them uplift us, while others bring discomfort, stress, or disappointment. The brain naturally gravitates toward the negative. It notices the one rude remark instead of the many kind ones, the single setback instead of the several successes. This tendency often blinds us to the good that exists in our lives. Yet perspective is powerful. It does not change the facts of what happens, but it changes the meaning we assign to them. And meaning is what shapes how we feel. The same event can either crush us or teach us, depending on the lens through which we view it. Consider two people who face the same challenge, perhaps losing a job. One may spiral in despair, interpreting it as proof of inadequacy and predicting endless failure. The other may acknowledge the pain, but also see it as an opportunity to reset, explore new directions, or develop resilience. The facts are identical, yet their experiences are drastically different. The difference lies in perspective. One focused on what went wrong, while the other chose to focus on what could go right. Perspective does not erase hardship, but it empowers us to find possibility within it. Focusing on what goes right doesn't mean ignoring struggles or pretending everything is perfect. It means choosing balance. Too often we allow a single negative moment to overshadow all the positives. A stressful meeting might ruin an entire day, even if the rest of the day was peaceful. A small failure might make us forget years of progress. This imbalance is not reality, it is a distortion created by the mind's focus. By consciously shifting perspective, we can train ourselves to notice the full picture, not just the painful fragments. When you intentionally recall what went right, a meaningful conversation, a task completed, a moment of laughter, you remind your brain that life is richer than the problems it tends to amplify. Perspective also determines how we grow. When you obsess over what went wrong, you remain stuck in frustration, regret, or blame. But when you focus on what went right, you open yourself to learning. For example, a mistake can be viewed as proof of incompetence, or it can be viewed as a lesson that sharpens your skills for the future. Both interpretations are available, but only one fuels progress. Growth requires the humility to acknowledge failure and the wisdom to see its hidden benefits. This is why people who adopt a positive perspective often show more resilience. They transform obstacles into stepping stones instead of walls. Our perspective also shapes relationships. In every interaction, we can choose to dwell on flaws or to appreciate strengths. In friendships, focusing only on disagreements can erode trust, while focusing on shared values strengthens connection. In families, emphasizing shortcomings breeds resentment, but noticing acts of care nurtures love. The people around us are imperfect as we are, but when our perspective highlights what is good rather than what is lacking, we create an atmosphere of understanding and gratitude. Over time, this not only improves how we see others, but also how others respond to us. Ultimately, perspective is a daily practice. Life will always give us both reasons to celebrate and reasons to complain. The choice lies in where we direct our focus. By training ourselves to notice what is right, we do not deny reality. We expand it. We allow joy to coexist with difficulty, hope to exist alongside fear, and meaning to emerge even in pain. This shift does not require extraordinary effort, it requires awareness and intention. Each time you pause and ask, what is still good here? What can I be thankful for? What can I learn? You are reshaping your experience of reality. Over time, these small choices accumulate into a profound transformation, a life where happiness is not dependent on perfection, but on perspective. Comparison and unrealistic expectations feed the unhappy brain, while self-acceptance frees it. The human mind is naturally inclined to measure itself against others. From childhood, we are graded, ranked, and compared, often taught that our value is tied to how well we perform in relation to those around us. In the modern world, this tendency is magnified by social media, where endless images of success, beauty, and wealth are presented as the standard. The brain absorbs these comparisons and turns them into harsh judgments. I am not enough, I am behind, I don't measure up. These thoughts feed dissatisfaction and anxiety, convincing us that happiness lies just beyond the next achievement or milestone. The problem with comparison is that it is never fair. When we look at others, we usually see only the highlight reel, not the full story. We see their successes without their struggles, their smiles without their tears. Meanwhile, we compare those polished images to our unfiltered reality, which includes every mistake, every doubt, every imperfection. This distorted perspective fuels insecurity and robs us of contentment. The brain, wired for survival, clings to these differences as if falling short in comparison is a threat to our worth. But in truth, comparison is a trap that keeps us chasing someone else's life instead of living our own fully. Unrealistic expectations further intensify this unhappiness. We often create rigid timelines for ourselves. By a certain age, we should achieve a career goal, reach financial stability, or build the perfect family. When reality unfolds differently, the brain interprets it as failure. Yet life rarely follows neat timelines, and the belief that it should creates unnecessary suffering. Expectations set too high or too rigidly leave no room for the unpredictability of life. They transform ambition, which can be healthy, into pressure, which can be destructive. Instead of motivating us, they drain us, because no matter what we achieve, it never feels like enough. Self-acceptance is the antidote to this cycle. It does not mean giving up on growth or ambition, but it means embracing who we are in this moment without constant judgment. When you practice self-acceptance, you tell your brain, I am enough as I am, even as I work to become better. This perspective quiets the noise of comparison and frees you from the endless pursuit of perfection. It allows you to celebrate progress, not just outcomes, and to value yourself independent of external validation. Self-acceptance is a choice to stop fighting with yourself and to begin supporting yourself instead. One of the most powerful shifts occurs when you realize that your worth is not measured by external standards, but by your ability to live authentically. The brain, when guided by acceptance, starts to relax its constant demands. Instead of obsessing over what others are doing, it turns inward to appreciate personal values, passions, and unique strengths. This doesn't mean you stop striving for success. It means you define success on your own terms. You begin to notice that peace comes not from beating others in comparison, but from aligning with who you truly are. Over time, the practice of self-acceptance builds resilience. When life does not meet your expectations, you no longer collapse into self-blame or resentment. Instead, you acknowledge the disappointment while still honoring your worth. You understand that being human means being imperfect, and that imperfection does not reduce your value. This shift frees the brain from the constant burden of judgment and opens space for gratitude, joy, and growth. Comparison shrinks, expectations soften, and happiness grows naturally from the acceptance of yourself as you are. In a world that constantly pressures us to be more, do more, and have more, choosing self-acceptance is a radical act of freedom. It is the path to peace, because it releases the unhappy brain from a race it was never meant to run. Mental training through mindfulness, journaling, or reflection, is as essential as physical training for well-being. We often understand the importance of exercising our bodies. We know that without movement, without effort, the body weakens, loses strength, and becomes vulnerable to illness. Yet many of us forget that the same principle applies to the mind. The brain left untrained easily falls into patterns of worry, distraction, and negativity. Just as muscles need regular use to remain strong, the mind needs consistent practice to remain calm, focused, and resilient. Happiness and peace of mind do not simply appear. They are the results of disciplined mental training. Mindfulness is one of the most effective practices for this training. In a world full of noise and constant stimulation, the mind is rarely still. It leaps from one thought to another, replaying the past and forecasting the future, often leaving us exhausted. Mindfulness teaches us to pause, to notice the present moment without judgment. When you sit quietly, breathing deeply, and simply observing your thoughts without clinging to them, you train your brain to detach from its constant chatter. Over time, this builds mental clarity and reduces stress. You learn that thoughts are not commands, they are simply events passing through the mind. This awareness gives you control over how you respond, rather than being controlled by every impulse or worry. Journaling is another powerful tool for mental training. Thoughts often become heavier when they remain unspoken or unprocessed. Writing them down creates distance, turning swirling emotions into structured words. When you put pen to paper, your brain releases tension as if unloading a burden. Journaling also helps uncover patterns, repeated fears, recurring sources of joy, or consistent triggers of stress. By recognizing these patterns, you gain insight into your inner world and can make conscious choices about what to change. Some people journal by listing gratitude, others by reflecting on daily experiences, and some by exploring deep emotions. No matter the method, the act of writing strengthens self-awareness and provides the brain with clarity. Reflection is equally essential. Life moves quickly, and without reflection, we risk living unconsciously, reacting rather than responding, drifting rather than choosing. Reflection means taking time to look back at experiences, not to dwell on them, but to learn from them. When you ask yourself questions such as, what went well today? What challenged me? What can I do differently tomorrow? You train your brain to extract meaning from experience. Reflection transforms both success and failure into fuel for growth. It slows the pace of life, allowing the mind to process events fully instead of rushing past them. These practices, mindfulness, journaling, reflection, work together to strengthen the mind. They build resilience, enabling you to handle challenges without collapsing into stress. They nurture focus, helping you stay present instead of being pulled endlessly into distraction. They cultivate gratitude and self-awareness, reminding you of the bigger picture beyond fleeting problems. Just as an athlete becomes stronger with regular training, your mind becomes calmer, clearer, and more balanced when you commit to these disciplines. The transformation is gradual but powerful as you begin to notice that situations which once overwhelmed you no longer carry the same weight. Neglecting mental training leaves the brain vulnerable. It becomes restless, reactive, and easily swayed by comparison, fear, and negativity. But by practicing mindfulness, journaling, and reflection, you reclaim control over your mental state. You learn to pause before reacting, to process emotions instead of being consumed by them, and to focus on what truly matters. This shift is not about ignoring life's challenges, but about facing them with strength and stability. Mental training ensures that when difficulties arise, your brain responds with clarity and calm rather than panic and despair. It creates the foundation for lasting happiness, proving that peace of mind is not a gift. It is a skill that must be practiced just like any other. Your unhappy brain is not your enemy. It needs guidance, support, and consistent nurturing to create joy. Many of us feel frustrated when we notice negative thoughts taking over or when we fall into cycles of worry and dissatisfaction. We may think there is something wrong with us, that we are weak for not being happy all the time. But the truth is that unhappiness often comes from the brain's natural patterns shaped by evolution, environment, and habit. Instead of seeing the brain as an adversary, it helps to treat it as a companion that sometimes loses its way and needs gentle direction. When you shift from battling your mind to guiding it, the entire relationship changes. The brain is like a powerful tool capable of extraordinary creativity and resilience. But like any tool, it must be used correctly. Left untrained, it tends to amplify fear, dwell on mistakes, and focus on threats. These tendencies were once vital for survival, but now often create unnecessary suffering. Recognizing this helps us separate ourselves from the negativity we feel. Instead of saying, I am unhappy, we can say, my brain is generating unhappy thoughts. That small change in perspective gives us room to step back, to notice what the brain is doing, and to choose a different response. Guidance begins with awareness. Support comes from the habits we build daily. Just as the body needs nourishment and exercise, the brain needs practices that encourage balance and peace. This can include mindfulness, gratitude, kindness, and rest. When you feed your brain positive input, you give it resources to function more effectively. Without support, it reverts to its survival wiring, defaulting to worry and dissatisfaction. For example, constant exposure to negativity, whether through news, toxic relationships, or self-criticism, exhausts the brain. But surrounding yourself with uplifting influences, focusing on gratitude, and taking time to rest create the opposite effect, allowing the brain to reset. Nurturing the brain also means practicing patience. Just as you would not expect a seed to grow into a tree overnight, you cannot expect your brain to shift instantly from unhappiness to joy. Old patterns take time to soften, and new patterns take time to strengthen. This is where compassion for yourself is essential. Instead of punishing yourself for feeling down, you can remind yourself that the brain is learning. Every moment you guide it toward peace, even if only briefly, you are nurturing long-term change. Consistency matters more than intensity. Small daily practices, repeated over, create transformation. Another important aspect of nurturing the brain is balance. While discipline and effort are necessary, so is rest. An overworked mind becomes restless and anxious, while a rested mind becomes clear and creative. Taking breaks, enjoying silence, and allowing yourself to disconnect from constant stimulation are ways of giving your brain the care it needs. Too often, we push ourselves relentlessly, expecting the brain to perform without pause. But just like a muscle, it grows stronger not only through effort, but also through recovery. By honoring both work and rest, we create the conditions for sustainable happiness. Ultimately, the unhappy brain is not a curse, but an opportunity. It is a reminder that joy is not automatic, it must be cultivated. By guiding your brain with awareness, supporting it with healthy habits, and nurturing it with patience and rest, you transform its patterns. Unhappiness no longer feels like an enemy attacking from within, but like a signal pointing to the need for care. When you respond with compassion instead of criticism, your brain slowly learns to find peace. Happiness then becomes less about escaping your mind and more about working with it, building a partnership where joy is possible and sustainable.